Most people don't think twice about where their food comes from. They don't think about the guy waking up before sunrise, running 1,000 acres of land, keeping cattle fed, crops rotating, and a family operation alive, all while the rest of the world sleeps. But one farmer in a tiny corner of Wisconsin did something that nobody saw coming. He picked up a camera, pointed it at his everyday life, and accidentally changed the way millions of people understand agriculture forever. His name is Ryan Kuster. He runs a 1,200-acre beef and crop farm in Potosi, Wisconsin, a town so small most people couldn't find it on a map. But by the time his channel, How Farms Work, crossed 98 million total views, the whole world had been watching. Teachers were playing his videos in classrooms, city dwellers were saying they finally understood where their food came from, and fellow farmers were tuning in just to pick up a new technique. None of it was planned. It started with a split-second decision in a college computer lab, a moment so small Ryan almost let it pass him by. Here's the story of how he didn't. It was 2012, and Ryan Kuster was sitting in a computer lab at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, trying to figure out his future. He was studying agribusiness, he loved the farm, but the question hanging over him was the same one that haunts every farm kid who goes to college: how do you actually go back home and make a living? The family farm wasn't a guaranteed paycheck, it was a bet, and he knew it. While sitting at that computer, he did something almost out of habit. He pulled up an old YouTube account he hadn't touched in years. Back in 2008, he'd uploaded a handful of short clips from the farm. Nothing polished, nothing planned, just basic footage of everyday life on his grandparents' dairy operation in Potosi. He hadn't promoted them, he hadn't told anyone about them, he'd essentially forgotten they existed. Then he saw the view count, 14,000 views, on videos he hadn't thought about in 4 years. No marketing, no algorithm tricks, no audience, just raw, unfiltered farm footage that strangers had somehow found and kept watching. For most people, that number might not mean much, but for Ryan, it hit differently. He immediately started searching YouTube for other farming content, expecting to find a crowded space full of creators doing exactly what he'd stumbled into. There was almost nothing. A platform with billions of viewers, and barely anyone was documenting real farm life. No one was showing what it actually looked like to run equipment at harvest, manage a beef herd, fix machinery in the middle of a field, or make the 1,000 small decisions that keep a working farm alive. The gap was enormous, and Ryan was staring right at it. He made a decision on the spot. He rebranded the channel, renamed it How Farms Work, and committed to uploading consistently. He started with once a month, then once a week, eventually 4 or more times a week. Each video was filmed, edited, and posted almost entirely on his own, often after working a full day on the farm. What started as a forgotten hobby in a college computer lab was about to become something neither Ryan nor anyone else could have predicted. To understand why Ryan Kuster became who he is, you have to go back further than that computer lab. You have to go back to Potosi, Wisconsin, a small farming community tucked into the southwestern corner of the state, and a family that had been working the land there since the 1950s. Ryan's grandparents built the operation from the ground up. They purchased their first farm decades before Ryan was even born, and for years the whole thing ran on dairy. Milking cows, managing the herd, keeping the books, that was the rhythm of life on the Kuster farm. Ryan grew up inside that rhythm. He was the youngest of 3 kids, with an older brother named Travis and a sister named Alicia, and from the time he was old enough to follow his dad and grandfather around, he was involved. Not watching from the sidelines, actually working, feeding calves, helping with equipment, learning how every piece of the operation fit together. Agriculture wasn't just a career path for Ryan, it was his entire world growing up. But there was another side to him that most people don't talk about. In high school, his brother Travis brought home the school's yearbook camera, and something clicked. Ryan signed up for photography classes, started experimenting, and quickly discovered he had a genuine eye for it. By the time he got to college at UW-Platteville, he'd already turned that hobby into a small business. He called it Saturn Photography, shooting events and portraits on the side to help cover his expenses. What seemed like 2 completely separate interests, farming and photography, were quietly building toward the same thing: Every hour Ryan spent behind a camera taught him how to compose a shot, control lighting, and tell a story visually. Skills that most farmers never develop. Skills that, as it turned out, would make his YouTube channel look completely different from anything else in that space when the time came. His parents, Dwight and Beth, kept the farm running through all of it. His dad owned and operated Kuster farms, and the expectation was always that the next generation would carry it forward. Ryan never questioned that. The only question was how. Just as Ryan was finding his footing with the channel, everything on the farm changed at once. In 2014, both of his grandparents passed away. The people who had built the Kuster operation from nothing, who had purchased that first plot of land back in the 1950s and spent decades milking cows through every market swing and hard season Wisconsin could throw at them, were gone. For any family, that kind of loss reshapes everything. For a farming family, it also forces a conversation that can't wait. What happens to the operation now? The timing made the decision even harder. Dairy farming across the country was getting crushed. Milk prices had been sliding for years, and by 2014 they had dropped to the point where small and mid-sized dairy operations were barely breaking even, if they were breaking even at all. Larger farms were expanding aggressively to stay competitive, driving costs down further and squeezing out the smaller outfits that couldn't scale fast enough to survive. The Custers were staring at a simple and brutal reality: continue dairy farming the way they always had, or change everything. They chose to change everything. The entire operation was converted. The dairy herd was out. In came beef cattle, corn, soybeans, and alfalfa across 1,200 acres of southwestern Wisconsin farmland. It was a complete reinvention of an operation that had run the same way for over half a century. For Ryan, who had grown up milking cows, who had done it as a kid before school, on weekends in every season, the shift wasn't just logistical, it was personal. That daily routine, the smell of the barn, the particular rhythm of a dairy farm morning, all of it was gone. But here's what that transition also gave him: a completely new set of stories to tell, new equipment, new techniques, new challenges playing out in real time on a farm that was essentially rebuilding itself from the ground up. While most creators would have seen disruption, Ryan saw content. He was already filming, he was already uploading, and now he had a front row seat to one of the most significant changes a farming family can go through. The camera was rolling for all of it. Here's something that gets lost when people talk about Ryan Kuster's channel hitting big numbers. The success wasn't just about views, it was about filling a void that had genuinely been left open, one that was having real consequences for how the public understood agriculture. By the time Ryan started posting consistently, farming had a serious image problem online. The information that existed about agriculture on the internet was either overly technical, written for people already inside the industry, or worse, it was sensationalized. Activist-driven, agenda-loaded content designed to make food production look sinister. Ryan watched this, and it bothered him deeply. He was living the reality of what farming actually looked like every single day, and what was being shown to the public bore almost no resemblance to it. So the channel became something more than a vlog. It became a correction. Every video he posted was a direct counter to the noise, not in an angry, combative way. Ryan never positioned himself as a political figure, but simply by showing the truth of what daily farm life looked like. Planting seasons, equipment breakdowns, cattle management, harvest days, the paperwork, the weather gambles, the machinery that cost more than most people's houses and had to be kept running no matter what. All of it, documented plainly and honestly. The audience that found him wasn't just curious city dwellers either. Teachers started using his videos in agricultural education classes because the footage was clear, accurate, and easy for students to follow. Parents put his videos on for their kids as part of a bedtime routine. Farmers themselves tuned in, not just to watch, but to learn. Ryan heard from viewers who told him they'd picked up a new approach to a task simply from watching how the Kuster operation handled it. That crossover was rare. Most content finds one audience and stays there. Ryan had somehow built something that worked for the complete outsider who had never set foot on a farm, and for the experienced operator who had been farming for 30 years. Both groups were watching, and both were getting something out of it. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone is telling the truth, and the truth turns out to be exactly what people were looking for. As the channel grew, the offers started coming in. Equipment dealers, product manufacturers, agricultural brands, all of them could see what Ryan had built, and they wanted a piece of it. For a lot of creators in that position, that's where things start to quietly fall apart. The content shifts, the audience notices, and the trust that took years to build gets traded away for a sponsorship check. Ryan had watched it happen to other channels. He had no intention of letting it happen to his. His stance was straightforward, and he said it publicly. His opinions were his own, and no amount of money was going to change that. He wasn't going to pick up a product he didn't believe in, point it at the camera, and tell his audience it was worth buying just because a company had cut him a deal. For a channel built entirely on showing real farm life honestly, that kind of compromise would have been fatal. His viewers trusted him precisely because nothing on the channel felt manufactured. The moment that changed, everything changed. But his integrity wasn't just about saying no. It was also about how he handled the partnerships he did take on. When he agreed to demo a New Holland tractor, a significant moment given that the Kuster family had a long and strong affiliation with John Deere equipment, he didn't soften his assessment to keep the relationship clean. He tested it thoroughly, gave his honest take on how it compared to what he was used to, and let the audience draw their own conclusions. No spin, no careful wording designed to protect a future deal, just a straight evaluation from someone who actually knew how to operate the machine. That approach set him apart from almost everyone else in the agricultural content space. Sponsored content in farming media had long been a problem. Reviews written by people with financial stakes in the outcome, equipment coverage shaped by advertising relationships. Ryan cut through all of that by simply refusing to play the game on anyone else's terms. The audience noticed, and it kept them coming back, video after video, season after season, not just for the farming content, but because they knew what they were watching was real. It's worth stepping back for a moment and thinking about what would have happened if Ryan had closed that laptop and walked out of the computer lab without acting on what he saw. The 14,000 views would have stayed there, quietly accumulating on videos nobody was promoting. The channel would have stayed dormant. Ryan would have gone back to the farm, figured out another way to make it work, and the agricultural content space on YouTube would have kept running the way it had been, mostly empty, occasionally misleading, and completely disconnected from the reality of what modern farming actually looked like. The millions of people who later told Ryan they had no idea where their food came from before finding his channel would have kept not knowing. That's not a small thing. There is a real and measurable cost to the gap between how farming is portrayed and how farming actually works. It shapes policy opinions, consumer behavior, and public trust in an entire industry that feeds the world. Ryan didn't fix all of that on his own. No single YouTube channel could. But he moved the needle in a way that nobody else in that space was positioned to do at a time when the internet was still deciding what agricultural content was going to look like. What he built wasn't an accident, but it also wasn't a master plan. It was the result of a kid who grew up on a farm, learned how to use a camera, stumbled onto a gap that nobody else had noticed, and had the discipline to show up consistently for over a decade, regardless of whether the algorithm rewarded him that week or not. That combination, the authenticity, the craft, the relentlessness, is what separated How Farms Work from every other channel that tried to do something similar and quietly disappeared. Ryan Kuster made a decision in a college computer lab in 2012 that most people would have talked themselves out of. He didn't overthink it. He didn't wait until the conditions were perfect. He just started uploading, kept going, and let the work speak for itself. The farm is still running. The camera is still rolling. And the world is still watching. It's worth stepping back and thinking about what would have happened if Ryan had closed that laptop and walked out of the computer lab without acting on what he saw. The 14,000 views would have sat there untouched. The channel would have stayed dormant, and the agricultural content space on YouTube would have kept running the way it had been, mostly empty, occasionally misleading, and completely disconnected from the reality of what modern farming actually looks like. The millions of people who told Ryan they had no idea where their food came from before finding his channel would have kept not knowing. That's not a small thing. There is a real cost to the gap between how farming is portrayed and how farming actually works. Ryan didn't fix all of that on his own, but he moved the needle in a way nobody else in that space was positioned to do, at exactly the right moment. He didn't overthink it. He didn't wait for perfect conditions. He just started uploading, kept going, and let the work speak for itself. The farm is still running, the camera is still rolling, and the world is still watching.